Welcome. This is Captain Tom on board the Silverwind, and I am joined with our co-host and producer Wilson, who's an intergalactic robot. And I will not let you, I won't make you suffer for having to hear him or see him. He'll be over there in the corner doing his thing and getting us to where we need to go. So today we're going to be covering the chapter in Genesis, chapter 21. And there's some pretty interesting things in that to unfold and discuss. But before we do any of that, just want to say welcome, Julian, and to everybody else. And we will be going to a new place today. We're going to be going to a planet called Venus. And yeah, so this shouldn't be too far of a jump for us. It's actually a pretty close planet. It's referred to as the sister planet of Earth, and we'll talk about exactly why, but we might as well go ahead and get over to that area. So let's I think with today we're gonna phase warp, Wilson. Yeah, I mean, I don't want to have to like go around Earth and then blast off into that direction. So, yeah, this will be the first time we're going to a planet that's actually towards the sun and not away from it. So, yeah, let's go ahead and set that up. This should probably work right here. All right. All right, Wilson, let's see if that works. Let's see here. Phase warp engines. Ah, yes, perfect. All right. This might get a little loud. Here we go. There we go. Perfect. So yeah, how you guys doing today? There she is. The beautiful and terrifying planet of Venus. Let's see. Let's do this. And we will lock ourselves in here. We don't want to float around and get lost in space, because that would suck. And we definitely don't want to fall into Venus. So as you could see, it kind of looks like a mess to look at, and there's a reason for that. It has an extremely thick atmosphere. I think it's about 97%. Let's see here. Let me get the exact percent. It's a very high percent here. Let's see. Yeah, I can't, I got the information right here, but there's a lot of information, so I can't see it at the moment. I'll tell you the percentage in a second, but it's around 95 to 96% carbon dioxide. So that's a lot of carbon over there. And it creates, one thing about carbon dioxide is it's a greenhouse effect, basically, or greenhouse gas. It traps in solar radiation, which causes it to heat up. And also, one thing that doesn't help with Venus as well is that it's a very slow rotation. Basically, a day on Venus is about a year on Earth, right? So it's got an extremely slow rotation, and also doesn't have much tilt. So one of the reasons we get summer and winter on Earth is because we have a good angle of tilt in which the Earth kind of wobbles and the sun isn't always directly on us, right? So when it's more direct, that's going to be summer for whichever hemisphere that you're in. And then when it's less direct, that's going to be generally wintertime. And so that tilt to the Earth has a lot of effect on, the climate and temperatures we experience. And so you have with Venus, it has a very low tilt. It's about 3 degrees. So because of that, you kind of have all this heat bearing down on it. And then as a result of that, with it all being trapped in there by carbon dioxide, the resulting temperature is, I think, about 860 degrees Fahrenheit, making it one of the hottest worlds here in our solar system. It's even hotter than Mercury, and Mercury is pretty close to the sun. So let's see here. We've got some other facts about Venus. Venus is a pretty crazy place. 864 degrees Fahrenheit is the median temperature. Now, Venus is about the same size as Earth. It's also a terrestrial planet, unlike a lot of these water worlds or gas planets that we've been visiting lately. This one actually it's very much like Earth, has a rock core, and I mean, most of it's earthen. And because of where it's located, it's about, if you judge the difference between us and the sun, it's about 25% of the way from us to the sun. So as far as celestial objects are concerned, it's actually pretty close to Earth. And it's basically suggested that wherever Venus and Earth came from, if you're looking from a materialist point of view, that both of them must have come from the same cloud or debris or dust or rocks or whatever that would have formed these two planets. And that means they both would have had a lot of the same material, a lot of same elements, including a whole lot of water. Now, of course, with a planet that is 867 degrees Fahrenheit, that water would not remain in a liquid state. It is all evaporated. There is no water on the surface of it for those reasons. And there's actually not really a trace of the water in the atmosphere either. And the reason for that is, once again, the materialist perspective, is that the radiation from the sun would have caused a chemical reaction with the water in the atmosphere, and almost maybe the best way of saying is like kind of delaminated it out of the planet entirely. And so it would have like kind of broke down those water molecules and leaked out all that oxygen and things like that. So all you're stuck with is that carbon dioxide as some, let's see here, I believe it's, I think it's hydrogen. I think that's the next biggest part of it. And you also have some clouds of sulfuric acid. So this is not a place that you want to go. The atmosphere, because it's so thick, is about 9 times, I think it's 9 times more pressure or surface pressure on the planet. So this is going to be a very highly pressurized, it's a very volcanic planet. Yeah, it's a lot of bad stuff going on the surface of Venus. No one will be visiting that anytime soon. So one of the things interesting about the story of Venus, where if it's came from all the same things that Earth did, why is it so different? Oh, one more interesting fact about this, by the way. So the idea is they came from the same celestial body, Earth and Venus did, because of their close proximity. Well, Earth rotates counterclockwise, while Venus rotates clockwise. So they're actually rotating in 2 different directions, which is pretty interesting by itself. The idea that anything in the universe would be kind of going in different directions like that. It's kind of an interesting idea. But if they came from 2 very different places, why did they end up 2 very different states, right? So one thing about the ocean is that the ocean it's one of the biggest things that are called a carbon sink. So there's 3 major carbon sinks on Earth. That's plant growth, it's limestone creation, and then is the ocean itself, and that's the biggest one. And the ocean basically just drinks in carbon out of the atmosphere. And as a matter of fact, if it weren't for our moon and we didn't have the tides and currents that we have, it's mainly the currents, the ocean, the volume of the ocean would actually soak up all the carbon out of our atmosphere, leaving nothing for plants to be created from, and everything would die on Earth. So thankfully we have the moon to create those currents to slow down how fast the ocean absorbs carbon out of our atmosphere. That begs the question, how did you get so much carbon on Venus whenever it must have had an ocean in its early state? And that's kind of a big question. Now, one thing that's suggested is that, well, maybe, let's see here, I think I need to get this mic a little closer. So one thing that's suggested is that maybe that, the slow rotation, the constant heat on one side of Venus, and then maybe combine that with a lot of volcanic activity, maybe that stuff evaporated the oceans. But there must have been some kind of event that would have had to evaporate all the oceans of Venus for the carbon to build up the way that it has and create the runaway effect that we see. But once again, it doesn't have any moon to speak of, so its oceans would not have had a current, and it would just been constantly soaking up all that carbon. So it really is hard to imagine that it would have ever gotten to the point where it's hot enough to boil the oceans without that carbon in the atmosphere to create that greenhouse effect. And so that's kind of a big mystery of the materialist perspective of Venus. So let's think about it this way. If volcanic activity probably is enough to evaporate an entire ocean, probably another way of looking at it is, let's see here, if you have maybe a lot of the heat, one thing to compare is this: if you put Earth in the place of Venus, because you might think, well, it's closer to the sun, surely we get hot enough. Well, the median temperature of Earth is about 59 degrees Fahrenheit. That's just kind of like the global temperature if you just average it out. That's kind of our climate. If you put Earth in the place of Venus, it would be around 90 to 95 degrees Fahrenheit. Much warmer, sure, you're closer to the sun. If you didn't have the rotation stuff, maybe it would get a little hotter than that. But it's kind of hard to imagine that it would ever get as high as 215 degrees, which is about the temperature you would need to start boiling the ocean. And as a result of that, that kind of, once again, makes it a very big mystery. Now, the theists, of course, also they have a much easier time explaining this, and the way they explain is simply say that God put it here this way to be different. And everything we've looked at so far, all the water worlds, moons that are around Saturn and Jupiter and that sort of thing, Earth itself, Venus, the gas planets themselves, all of them are very different from one another. And, that could be reflective of a creator that, liked making things different. So it could be that as well. You believe what you want to believe. But yeah, that's Venus for you. It's pretty cloudy. It would be nice to get some instruments that can pierce that cloud, get through all that atmosphere, and we could actually see the topography of Venus itself. I think there's been some attempts to that, but there's nothing that I found that's super clear on that. But anyways, that's going to be our background as we talk about Genesis chapter 21 today. So in order to do that, we're going to go ahead and go back aft. Wilson's going to turn this ship around, and yeah, let's go ahead and get that started. I think there it is. Perfect. All right, we'll see you guys in the reading room. All right, look at that. It's a beauty. So let's go ahead and kind of just draw this in a little bit here and get into our story for the day. So what we have been covering, obviously, Genesis, and we've been covering the story of Abraham. So there's been a few ups and downs in Abraham's story. He's someone who's chosen by God to basically be the father of a nation that God is going to use to bless the whole world. And that's something that God has told Abraham, but one of the issues is that Abraham has not had a child until him and Sarah decided to try and make things go a little bit faster. They tried to achieve this plan that God said he had for them in their own way. And so they actually took an Egyptian servant, and Sarah's the one who proposed the idea to Abraham, and Abraham, it's kind of his fault because he agreed to it. Sarah wasn't in a good place emotionally, you could tell in the text, but she basically offers Hagar as a way of trying to say, hey, listen, I can't get pregnant, but maybe you can have a child through Hagar here, and then we can go about this whole promise. So he went about a way that wasn't God's design or plan to try and bring about the thing that God had promised them. This led to, Ishmael being born. And so this is actually Abraham's first son, but it's not from Sarah. God is, he has to step into the situation because it gets out of hand very quickly because Sarah is not in a very good emotional state. She starts to have some conflict with Hagar, and she, tries kicking Hagar out. God has to intervene. Actually, she doesn't try to kick her out at the time. She just really mistreats Hagar, treats her very poorly, and to the point where Hagar runs away. When Hagar runs away, God has to intercede, tells Hagar to go back and basically, do what you're asked to be to do there, and God has to kind of fix the mess a little bit. But it's not a very good moment or a look for Sarah and Abraham at that point in time in the story. With later on, God has said, like, listen, I am going to give you a son through Sarah. That was my whole plan. You didn't have to do this whole Hagar situation. So we have a little bit of conflict there, and we have Sarah who becomes pregnant. Miraculously. It's something we covered in the last chapter. And so something God promised, and it happened. So now we're basically going to pick up from there into the birth of Isaac, which means laughter, and it's kind of a callback to when God is telling them about this. Both Abraham and Sarah both laugh at the idea that in their old age Sarah could become pregnant. And God says, well, why are you laughing? As a matter of fact, your son's name is going to be Isaac, which means laughter. So there's a little bit of a poetic jest in there, and that soft rebuke. So let's go ahead and open the books then. Or I guess books is a good description of it. Going to go to chapter 21, and we're just going to start reading probably just verse 1 through 7. So we're going to get a good little chunk of the story, and then we'll talk about it a little bit. Let's see here. Let's go to this view. Perfect. The Lord kept his word and did for Sarah exactly what he had promised. she became pregnant and she gave birth to a son for Abraham in his old age. This happened just at the time God said it would. Actually, I do want to pause right there. All right, that's just verse 1. But for some context, when God promised a son to Abraham and that his son from Sarah, he made that promise 25 years prior to this. So they had to wait a long time for this promise to be, to be completed, right? And let me know how do you guys feel about that in the chat? God says he's going to promise this thing, and then he doesn't tell them it's going to be in 25 years. He just says it's going to happen one day. So with that, how do you guys feel about that? It's like God's promising a thing and just tell them to wait patiently. It's part of the reason they got impatient and did the whole thing with Hagar. But it's kind of an interesting thing about God, because surely he had the power to make this happen 25 years prior. So be interested to know what your guys' thoughts are on that. So we have patience isn't my strong suit. Well, maybe it's that. Maybe he's trying to build up their patience. But comes down to faith in him and his promises. That's a really good point, Lisa. So I would say he's testing their faith, and which also goes to another question. Why does God test our faith, right? What's the whole exercise and purpose of that? Because God knows people's hearts, right? He knows everything. He knows their heart. He knows if they're, faithful or not. So why test it? It's an interesting question. We'll go ahead and read 2 through 7. Anytime you want to put that in the chat, you can, and we'll just keep talking about it. So let's go here. Yeah. Let's do this. All right, starting in verse 2. Oh, no, I read through 2. Okay, so we're going to start in verse 3, end in 7. And Abraham named their son Isaac. 8 days after Isaac was born, Abraham circumcised him as God had commanded. Abraham was 100 years old when Isaac was born. And Sarah declared, God has brought me laughter. All who hear about this will laugh with me. Who would have said to Abraham that Sarah would nurse a baby? Yet I have given Abraham a son in his old age. All right, perfect. So, so we've kind of broken this down a little bit about how they named the kid Isaac. This was God told them to do. God followed through with his promise, and so they obediently followed through with what God asked them in this moment. So I love this saying right here at the end of it. We have a 6 and 7 where Sarah's kind of declaring poetically about you can see the real difference here. She's gone through a point of being very depressed. One of the things she mentioned is that prior with the whole Hagar situation, she felt that God had left her out of the promise and everything that he was doing with Abraham. God proved that was not true. He even gave, her name was Sarai, gave her the name Sarah, which has some significance there. But showing that she was 100% a part of what he was doing. And now you can see her attitude change completely to one where she's ecstatic, full of hope. Who would have said in my old age that I would nurse a child? Like, she's so excited about the opportunity to be a mother, and now it's finally been fulfilled. And she's in her, I'm pretty sure it's early 90s at this point. It's pretty interesting stuff. We talked about a little bit in the last chapter with Abimelech and his attempt to marry her. Where it's like, well, if she's like 90 years old, why would someone, do that? Well, she's probably preserved a degree of her youth, to be able to nurse a child and to get pregnant and that sort of thing. So there's definitely some, miraculous stuff going on here, 100% by God. Let's go ahead and go into the next part here. The promised child, Isaac. But there's a bit of a problem here. You see, we have 2 kids now, one born from the promise that God had to Abraham specifically, and one born from a human attempt to try and bring about something that, was seen as God's way of doing things, but not actually following God's way of doing things. God promised his son, God promised a nation through Abraham, and they decided that they were going to try and bring about this thing that God had promised, but in a way that was against God. So, and that is going to be Ishmael. There's some really interesting kind of a picture analogy that's created with these two kids. So let's go ahead and go through 8 and all the way to 11, and we'll basically break it down after that. When Isaac grew up and was about to be weaned, Abraham prepared a huge feast to celebrate the occasion. But Sarah saw Ishmael, the son of Abraham, and her Egyptian servant Hagar making fun of her son Isaac. So she turned to Abraham and demanded, "Get rid of that slave woman and her son. He is not going to share in the inheritance with my son Isaac. I won't have it." This upset Abraham very much because Ishmael was his son. All right. Drama is back in full motion. So we have a scene here. It says that, about the time that Isaac was weaned. So this is going to be about, this could be anywhere between 1 to 5 years old. This is probably somewhere around 3 years old. It's probably the best guess for it. Basically, weaned just means that is going to be when the kid is no longer has to breastfeed, right? They can actually eat regular food and that sort of thing. So we've got a situation here where it's not even Hagar who's doing this. Maybe Hagar's been humbled by the situation prior. It's Ishmael that's now making fun of Isaac. We don't know the context fully of that, but it's not hard to imagine there would obviously be conflict between Ishmael and Isaac. Not only do they have different mothers, they're tied up in this whole promise that God has about a nation who is going to inherit that, and the older son would typically be the one to inherit things from the father, but now this second oldest son is going to be the one who's actually promised to inherit things. So there's a bit of clash of culture with what God has planned here, and we already see in this very young age, when Ishmael's a kid, that there's going to be some conflict here. And so Sarah's solution is kick them out. And so that's not something that Abraham really wants to do, because Ishmael is his son. It's his firstborn son, and he cares about Ishmael clearly. So we'll have to see what they do with that. Just some guy. Welcome. How did God communicate with Sarah and Abraham in that time? So actually, that's a great question. It looks like a lot of it happened with visions. Looks like Abraham was the main one who was actually in contact with God. I don't think there's any reference to God speaking to Sarah directly, except for that moment when God came down in human form and ate and talked with Abraham. And so you have Sarah overhearing God in that conversation. And of course, within context of what we mean by God in that, because the Father, no one can stand in his presence and that sort of thing, this would have to be the Son of God. So anytime we have like a human personification who stands right there in front of people, that is going to be the Son of God, not God the Father. It's basically the pre-incarnate Jesus, hanging out with Abraham, eating. There were 2 angels with him there. And that's when Sarah overheard him talking about how she was going to get pregnant in her old age. And that's when she laughed and God rebuked her. So there's that moment. A lot of times it's also been through visions. Abraham specifically getting a vision from God and then being obedient to what God is saying in that. I can't think if there's any other one. Maybe in dreams, that may have come up before as well. So that's kind of been the major ones. But there was an actual, one-to-one interaction, before the whole Sodom and Gomorrah thing went down. So Neil Mail, prayer, my guy, nice. Yeah, no, absolutely. Not like that Neil Mail. That's great. Let's see here. Let's see here. So we got Ishmael versus Isaac in this, and now Abraham has to make a choice, and clearly Abraham is not so keen on listen to his wife this time. He was very keen on listening to her before when he was the prospect of getting a son, and now that he has the prospect of losing a son, he's having second thoughts. So God once again is going to have to step in to fix the mess that the humans in the story are creating. So Abraham and Sarah, they are not perfect. God didn't pick them because they were perfect or mighty or great in their own way. It was just through the humility and faith of Abraham to listen to God and go to a place he had never been, because God had called him to do it, likely in a vision. Once again, called him out of a pagan land, to make a people of his own. So pretty interesting stuff. Also speaks to the nature of God and kind of how he views things and how he does things. He doesn't go after the best of the best or what people think of as the best of the best, right? So with that, we have to deal with these very human characters here. Let's see what happens next, because that's going to be really important. Actually, you know what? I do want to say this. So this is actually a good time to bring up kind of this imagery of Ishmael and Isaac. So Isaac is obviously the product of God's promise. Ishmael is the product of human invention, right? Even if what they were wanting, it's not that what they were trying to get was necessarily bad. Wanting a son to fulfill the thing that God had promised to them, a nation of people that would be descendants from Abraham, isn't a bad thing to want that. But the way they went about going to try and get that thing to fulfill the desires of their heart, they did so with what you would call a very worldly or fleshly way of going about it. Basically, trying to do it in a way that leaves God out of the equation, or not do things God's way. And there's actually, this has been referred to later on in the Bible. In Galatians chapter 4, there's a man named Paul who's basically, someone who is converted to Christianity very early on. He sees Jesus, and Jesus blinds him, has this whole thing. He was persecuting the church, and then became one of the biggest, apostles for the church. And so Paul would have a lot of these interactions with the Jewish people who, the ones that would not believe that Jesus Christ was the Son of God. And so in one of his interactions in Galatians 4, he brings up this story because the Jewish people are saying, listen, we are sons of Abraham. And he says, are you the type of son that you think you are? You think you're like Isaac, but really you're like Ishmael. You're trying to honor God, but through worldly means, right? Through surface level things. And so he compares them to being like Ishmael, and that the church is like that of Isaac, because that is what God has promised through Jesus Christ. And so we have the children of promise and the children of the world. And that's actually, you can extrapolate that to really anything. I mean, the pursuit of our desires in a way that is against God is basically kind of what Ishmael represents. And Ishmael is the one who's scoffing at Isaac first. Just the world scoffs at God's people. But ultimately, there has to be a separation between these two things. And right now they're in the same household. So let's see what happens with this. We're going to go to, let's see here. We're going to be the next part. 8 through 11, we just did that. So let's go through 12 and 14, just a little further down the road, and kind of break that down. All right. Let's see here. We have, but God told Abraham, do not be upset over the boy and your servant. Do whatever Sarah tells you, for Isaac is the son through whom your descendants will be counted. But I will also make a nation of the descendants of Hagar's son, because he is your son too. All right, God's solution to all this is to say, listen to Sarah, and essentially let Hagar and Ishmael leave, right? Kick them out, which is kind of I don't know, it sounds kind of weird on the surface. Like God is telling, like, yeah, listen to Sarah, who's, I mean, she's obviously acting out of impulse, out of the emotion of being angry, probably some degree of jealousy. She's acting out of a very human thing, but God is acting out of wisdom here. If Ishmael and Isaac stay in the same household, things will be worse off for both Ishmael and Isaac. But God is promising Abraham, he's like, listen, go ahead and let them leave. I will take care of Ishmael, and Ishmael will have a great number of people that are descendant from him, and I'm going to take care of them both, right? So you don't need to worry about them, and it's okay to let them go. I've got this. So God is basically telling him to let to let God take care of it, and to go ahead and send them out of the household so they are separated and there isn't conflict within the household over, those types of things. So yeah, there's a lot of wisdom in that, right? And God is showing his mercy and grace and not just like letting them just be out and not taken care of. God is stepping in to say that he's going to do that. So Abraham now has to act in faith to allow God to have control of the situation. Because Abraham could have just said, no, I will never do that. I'm just going to hold on to the control of this. I'm going to make sure Ishmael and Isaac grow up and don't fight and everything's just going to be fine. So we'll see what Abraham does here, because now he's got a choice, right? Let's see here. We've got, we just ended with, actually, let's go 12 through 14. That's going to be the next part here. Let's go ahead and jump into it. All right. So we've got, let's see here. Did I go all the way there? All right. Actually, we're going to go past 14 here. So Abraham got up early the next morning, prepared food and a container of water, and strapped them on Hagar's shoulders. Then he sent her away with their son, and she wandered aimlessly in the wilderness of Beersheba. When the water was gone, she put the boy in the shade of a bush. Then she went and sat down by herself about 100 yards away. I don't want to watch the boy die, she said, and she burst into tears. I'm going to stop right there for a dramatic pause. So far, Abraham is a wealthy man, and he gives them some provision of food, a container of water. This is not enough for them to really make it far. So why Abraham does this? It's because he's trusting in what God promised. God promised that he would take care of Hagar, he would take care of Ishmael, to go ahead and let them go. And as a showing of that, he could have just overburdened them, sent a group with them, and kept holding on to the control of the situation. But he lets go of control completely, which shows his faith in what God has said here. And this has got to be a really tough thing to do, because he really does care about Ishmael. He really does love Ishmael. So I don't know how he thinks about Hagar. It never really says in the story what he thinks of Hagar, but so now he's having to, I don't know, I can think of times in my life where the right thing to do is to let go of control, and that could be really tough, right? And so now Hagar is in this situation where she's put Ishmael, by a bush, and then she goes about 100 yards away, which is about a football field length away, and then sits down and basically, Ishmael is probably like, I think I'd look up his age. I think he's around 10 or something like that at this time. He's not like a little baby, but he's a little kid. And so she's basically, to the point of losing hope, right? So this is about the second time that we've seen her in a situation like this. She's run out of her provisions. She's run out of water. And from a human standpoint, from a physical standpoint, there is nothing else that she can do to improve this situation. She's at the end of her rope here. And so she's basically just giving into despair and giving up, which is a really sad thing to see, but that's not the end of the story. So let's keep on reading and see what happens next. But God heard the boy crying, and the angel of God called to Hagar from heaven. Hagar, what's wrong? Do not be afraid. God has heard the boy crying as he lies there. Go to him and comfort him, for I will make a great nation from his descendants. Then God opened Hagar's eyes, and she saw a well full of water. She quickly filled her water container and gave the boy a drink. And God was with the boy as he grew up in the wilderness. He became a skilled archer, and he settled in the wilderness of Paran. His mother arranged for him to marry a woman from the land of Egypt. Very nice. Okay, so basically God in this situation is speaking down from heaven to her. So literally like a voice in the sky. And he kind of, in whether or not he magically materializes a well, or if he just simply prevented her from being able to see it, maybe in her despair, she wasn't really looking anymore, but prevented her from being able to see it so that he could make this point that, hey, trust in me, I will take care of you, right? Don't despair. This is the future I have for you, and just trust in that. And with that, as soon as he does that, he now allows her to see a solution so that, if she showed up and she saw the well on her own, she probably wouldn't be thinking of God. But now she has God on her mind as the one who's taking care of her. So it's almost like God had to prove to her, Abraham already trusted God to take care of her and Ishmael. But now Hagar needs to basically learn to trust God with their situation. And this is God's way of getting her, to understand that he's doing this, and allows her to get to a very low place and then gives her hope. Once again, speaks to the nature of God, in my opinion, throughout. You'll see that kind of theme happening a lot in the Bible when talking about who God is, and all this speaks to the character and nature of God, and in the Bible. So yeah, pretty interesting stuff right there. And the end result, we get to see what the end result is. They do stay in the wilderness, but they make a life for themselves. He gets connected with community in Egypt. He gets married, and she's the one who facilitates the marriage. So clearly she's gotten to a place where she's doing well for herself. So pretty interesting stuff right there. Ishmael will have many descendants, and we will see if there's anything that happens with that between the descendants of Ishmael and the descendants of Isaac. So keep in mind that will be a source of drama for later. But for now, we're just going to go ahead, get into the rest of the story. The story is going to take a sharp turn, a very sharp turn, and it's going to go back to Abraham and a whole new scene going on. So we'll get through that, and we'll end whenever we get to the end of the chapter. So let's go ahead and start reading the next part and see what's happening. About this time, Abimelech came to Phicol, his army commander, to visit Abraham. God is obviously with you, helping you in everything you do, Abimelech said. Swear to me in God's name that you will never deceive me, my children, or any of my descendants. I have been loyal to you, so now swear that you will be loyal to me and to this country where you live as a foreigner. So a couple things here. Abimelech may not be the same Abimelech we talked about in the chapter prior. The reason for that is that Abimelech is a title, kind of like Pharaoh. So when we get to later on the story, it'll talk about Pharaoh. It's a title, right? So it just means king. So Abimelech is like a king of Canaan. It could be the same Abimelech. It could be a different one. And this is probably not the first or only time that a king has approached Abraham and said, hey, clearly God is with you. Let's form some kind of treaty. Basically in this, he's just asking that Abraham's descendants will not deceive him, won't trick him. And so basically he forms this treaty with this Abimelech guy. We'll get to Abraham's response here. But, Abraham is the guy who stopped the world-ending army, right, earlier on in the story. He's someone who's very famous, someone who's very wealthy and has a big household. Clearly someone that people would want to be allied with and would want some good favor with. So there's that whole part of it. And we're going to see a little bit of Abraham's reaction here and how this exactly goes down. So let's go ahead and just jump to the next part. We might actually cover, let's see here, we might cover a good part here, just so we can kind of get the flow of the conversation here. Abraham replied, yes, I swear to it. Then Abraham complained to Abimelech about a well that Abimelech's servants had taken by force from Abraham's servants. This is the first I've heard of it, Abimelech answered. I have no idea who is responsible. You have never complained about this before. Abraham then gave some of his sheep, goats, and cattle to Abimelech, and they made a treaty. But Abraham also took 7 additional female lambs and set them off by themselves. Abimelech asked, why have you set these 7 apart from the others? Let's go ahead and pause real quick. I know we had a lump of text right there. So basically, as the conversation goes, Abraham says, yes, I'll form this treaty with you, but we need to settle a matter. So one of the things that Abraham's been doing is that he's a nomad, right? Well, we see right here that he's not a nomad with no claim to land. He just doesn't build anything on the land, no permanent structures and that sort of thing. He does, in fact, own pieces of land, and he owns certain wells. And these wells are extremely important because it doesn't rain enough there for them to get water from the rain. And there's not a lot of rivers and things like that, freshwater springs and stuff for them to get a lot of water from. So these wells are extremely important. And it seems like there's a particular well that Abimelech's servants had captured from Abraham. And it seems that Abraham just allowed them to do it, right? So there was a bit of a controversy taken as well. And he's like, listen, if we're going to form this treaty, you got to give me my well back. And of course, Abimelech, maybe he did know about it, but here he's trying to form a treaty with Abraham. So his response is, well, I didn't know about this. You never complained about it before. Of course, I'll fix this situation for you. And I think the main thing the Bible's trying to show right here is that although Abraham was a nomad, he did in fact have property rights and a claim to property in the promised land, which will kind of help validify his descendants also having a claim to land here, because they can say, listen, like, this is where we came from, right? This is where our ancestry is has a claim to. So we're going to see some of that happening later on in the story. Let's go ahead and finish this out, because they exchange some animals, or at least Abraham is giving animals over to Abimelech. And why is he doing this? I mean, if it's his well and Abimelech has agreed to give it back to him, why is he giving animals? Well, these animals could be, at least the first set of them, could have been to form a treaty very similar, or a covenant very similar to what, God had did with Abraham, where they cut the animals in two and they walk through it. It could be that kind of covenant. It could just be that he is basically paying for this well so that Abimelech cannot say that, he can't he doesn't have any claim against Abraham owning this well. So Abraham is going above and beyond to make sure, hey, listen, I didn't just come here and take it by force. I didn't just claim it for nothing. I am paying for this, so your people will have zero claim to it. There'll be no argument. It'll settle all of it, which is actually pretty smart. So let's get to the rest of this, because there's also these 7 female lambs. By the way, the female lambs are extremely important. You could probably put, from what I looked up, you could put, and it depends on seasons and stuff. I'm not a shepherd, but one ram, can be in a flock of like 100 or 200 ewes, which is a female lamb, right? A female sheep. So female sheep were extremely important. They were extremely valuable, a lot more valuable than the male sheep would be. So to give something that valuable to him, we'll see what the explanation is. All right. Why have you set these 7 apart from the others? Abraham replied, please accept these 7 lambs to show your agreement that I dug this well. Then he named the place Beersheba, which means well of the oath, because that was where they had sworn the oath. After making their covenant at Beersheba, Abimelech left with Phicol, the commander of his army, and they returned home to the land of the Philistines. Then Abraham planted a tamarisk tree at Beersheba, and there he worshipped the Lord, the eternal God, and Abraham lived as a foreigner in Philistine country for a long time. All right, we got Philistines being brought up again. Philistines will one day be a very bitter enemy and rival to the Israelite people, especially when they basically re-inhabit this land. And you can already see right here, there's kind of some tension in their relationship, but Abraham is trying to be as peaceful as possible. He's trying to be wise in how he deals with his neighbors, and he wants to be just about it. It's like, listen, take these 7 lambs as basically it's almost like payment, but not. It's like, hey, this is proof that you agreed, because you have these lambs, you agreed to basically state that this well belonged to me. So if anyone ever comes back to dispute this, we can point to that. You have these lambs in your possession. Maybe they were marked by Abraham as being a part of his flock, and it's like, hey, you have these, and so if there's any other problems, we can then defer to that. So there's a lot of wisdom there. He doesn't just go by Abimelech's word, so he makes sure there's additional kind of support for his claim. So he's living peacefully with his neighbors, and he has a claim to property. and he's done it in a very moral and righteous way. So pretty cool stuff there. And that's basically it for chapter 21 of Genesis. Go ahead and keep moving forward. We'll start seeing some interesting stuff that God is asking from Abraham in regards to Isaac. And that's basically, this story has got a lot of back and forth with Abraham. We've kind of talked about that. And it seems like Abraham's gotten to a place now where he's starting to really trust in God. So I think what we're going to do here is we're going to go back to the front of the ship and head on back to Earth. While we're doing that, my question, and you can comment this in the chat, but I'll kind of explain my answer to this. It's not the answer, but it's just my answer to why I believe, God will test people's faith when he already knows their heart, right? He knows everything. So why test them? And so I'll give you my perspective on that as we head back to Earth. So with that, let's just go ahead and do that. I'll see you guys at the front of the ship. All right, we got it all turned around here. So perfect. We've got Venus right here. Maybe we'll. I wouldn't want to fly down into it. It's I don't know. We'll maybe come back here after a while. It's pretty interesting. Maybe we'll go to Mercury next. Either way, these these planets are pretty cool. No two are exactly the same, even if like Earth and Venus supposedly came from the same thing. Two very different consequences. Now, I will say this. So one of the things Venus is used for is it's used as basically an analogy for, or not analogy, but like a warning about what could happen to Earth if we have a greenhouse effect, basically too much carbon in the atmosphere. Well, since there's about like 97% carbon dioxide in Venus's atmosphere, there's about 0.003 or 4% carbon dioxide in Earth's atmosphere. So we're not even getting to get close to this. And also the even if carbon dioxide levels increased on Earth, because we have those three, and it's mainly the later two, the carbon sinks, those things escalate and draw more carbon out of the atmosphere, the more carbon we put into the atmosphere. So the most that actual climate scientists who are global warming alarmists, the most that they actually do say could possibly happen is that the climate would get a little bit warmer, which would cause the oceans to rise a little bit, coastal cities would be affected, and where we could grow crops would be affected. So there's not a lot of that change currently happening right now. I mean, the cherry trees are very sensitive to climate, and they're still doing just fine where they're at. So obviously it'd probably take a long time for any real change like that to happen, but for it to get to a runaway effect like this, there's really not a lot of natural way of explaining how Earth could get to this point, which begs to the question how, if this was, a result of natural processes, and it started off the same way Earth did, how it could have gotten to this point. So with that, let's go ahead and head back to Earth here so I could drop you guys off. Let's see here. Let's go ahead and we'll do it in this screen right here. That should get us going. Let's try it. Well, as long as we won't end up in the sun, we'll be fine. There we go. See, we're good. Let's see. All right, so let's go ahead and talk a little bit about what we were talking about before. All right, we'll make sure we're in place here. Easy day. Okay, we're just gonna leave it there. All right, so my perspective of this, the reason that, and it's kind of validated through the rest of the Bible, especially in the New Testament. There's a place in the New Testament, and I don't have it written down right now. I could look at it real quick if you guys want. but there's a set of verses that talk about the heroes of faith, right? It's almost like the faith hall of fame, and Abraham's brought up in it, Noah's brought up in it, I think Moses is brought up in it. A lot of people in the Old Testament are talked about as being these great people of faith, and it talks about why they're great people of faith is because that God told them to do something and they followed through with an action, right? And this idea that, action is the thing that completes faith, right? So faith starts in the heart, starts in the mind, and then it's completed when you act on it. It's also one of the explanations for, baptism in the church is that, hey, you've made a confession to follow Christ. Now you need to act on it. And that first act should be a public proclamation or declaration to say, hey, listen, I have made this choice. And that action is baptism, right? And it's kind of a completion of faith. It doesn't mean that someone's not saved, obviously, before baptism, but it's just that idea that when your faith is tested and then you actually act it out, it is now faith complete. It's the fullness of it. And so God is giving Abraham the opportunity to actually, follow through with his faith and actually complete that faith. It is his faith was counted towards him as righteousness when he went to the land that God had told him to go to. And so that's kind of how it's, it's not, it doesn't say, and he thought it in his heart before he left, and now he was counted to him as righteousness. No, it's when he acted on it. So there's something really powerful in the Bible about the idea of, trusting God, and then on that trusting God showing through with your actual actions, and it becomes real when it actually surfaces through an actual response or your actions, right? So that's the biggest reason I believe that God will test people. It's all a part of the process of the fullness of faith and the full expression of faith. So I don't know, but let me know what you think in the comments below, in the chat, or if you're watching this when it's not live. And yeah, we'd love to hear what you guys have to say and kind of take it from there. But that's going to be it for today, unless you guys have anything else for me. So yeah, I think that's it, Wilson. Let's go ahead, get to that outro scene, and I will see you guys next time. Thanks for coming, and yeah, I'll see you next week.
I got lost in the night, under the stars up in the sky. Directions hard to find, under the stars up in the sky. I got lost in the night, under the stars up in the sky. Directions hard to find, under the stars up in the sky. I don't know where to take this, I don't wanna break this. We're living in the moment, we're living in the moment. Your head is on my shoulder, but we're getting older. Baby, it's you and I. There's no one else I see. I know you'll follow me. I don't know where to take this, I don't wanna break this. We're living in the moment, we're living in the moment. Your head is on my shoulder, we're never getting older. Baby, it's you and I.